a very important piece of economic choreography, which is the summer economic statement. Up until recently, this wasn't a big news item, wasn't one that even the poll corps would put in the diary, but it has assumed a great amount of new political significance. And to discuss it today is Philip Bryan, who's the Irish Independent's political editor. We'll also be hearing from Michelle Murphy, who is the research and policy analyst with Social Justice Ireland, and Cliff Taylor, who is an economic columnist with the Irish Times. You're all very welcome aboard. Philip, I'll come to you first in studio. Can you just give us some of the initial takeaways you're hearing from this afternoon's announcement?
Yeah, look, it hasn't officially been announced yet, but the Cabinet has signed off on it, and it's going to be a bumper budget. There's going to be a lot more extra spending there than people expected. The government has taken the handcuffs off themselves to allow the fiscal space, as they call it, to address all the inflationary problems we've had this year, the cost of living problems. And the top figures are, anyway, it'll be the budget will be for the coming year about 6.7 billion, and that's going to include a €1 billion tax package, which is one of the biggest I can't remember a tax package that big. And then the rest will be used for new measures. That'll include the likes of some demographic issues or updates to policy that they have to introduce, the public sector pay deal that they're in the middle of discussing. And then separate to all that, which isn't really technically part of the economic statement, but they are also planning a series of new measures directly aimed at addressing inflation on budget day. So it's almost a budget within a budget that we're going to have as well. And that's going to be using money from the surplus this year. Basically, they didn't spend all the money that they budgeted for. So they have additional money to spend on things where you might see this that electricity credit, you might see a renewal of that. You might also see the Christmas bonus being paid a little earlier in the year, or maybe it'll be paid twice. That remains to be seen. But you'll see something certainly around those lines announced and implemented on budget day, but not to be confusing people, but separate then to the budget measures that will be introduced in the new year.
Right, okay, so there's a flow of money in various phases. Cash machine, how are you? Let me come to Cliff Taylor as well to give us some of the economic background. Cliff, if you go back to your classic economic textbooks, you're told that inflation is something where you've got too much demand chasing too few goods and services. I mean, on a gut level, a lot of people would react to this package and say this is just going to fuel up the fire even further, however, well-intentioned it is. Do you have those concerns?
Yeah, to an extent, Emmett, but I do think that the cause of the inflation we're seeing isn't the usual cause, the kind of classic economic one that you're talking about there, where people are going out partying, spending right, left and centre. The cause of the inflation we're seeing is from the supply side of the economy: higher energy prices, higher food prices, all the fallouts of kind of the inefficiencies in the world economy after COVID, ports shut down, people unable to get hold of things, prices going up and up. Now, central banks are saying, look, we have to stop that rot, if you like, from spreading throughout the economy. We have to put up interest rates. We have to stop inflation from spreading. So, there is a risk that the government putting more money into the economy is going to add a bit of fuel to the fire. And I think it's really all a question of balance. There's no question but that the government has to step in and support people, because the speed at which this has hit has been just extraordinary. So I think the proof of it is going to come on budget day in terms of the type of measures they use. I think if they focus their fire, if you like, forensically on those who are worst hit, those at the lower end of the income ladder, those in fuel poverty, and kind of lower income earners as well, you probably won't see too much of a feed through to inflation. But if it's kind of the money is spread more widely to the economy, you might see more of that. I mean, the other thing that's clear for today, we already have published the Exchequer figures for the first half of the year, and I mean they're quite extraordinary. Tax returns up 25%, corporation tax up 53% year on year. So extraordinary tax figures, and there is money there. The question, I suppose, is the risk to those revenues in the second half of the year if there is a big economic slowdown or moving into next year, and particularly that exposure in terms of our reliance on corporation tax, which is just growing year on year. Now,
Philip has given us a good menu of the different measures that are going to be there. Is there anything in that menu? Is there one particular measure or item that you'd say that's a tricky one, that could be the one that obviously politically but also economically causes a problem?
Well, I suppose the ones that are going to be more dangerous from an inflation point of view are the ones that are going to put money into the pockets of people who already have money in their pockets. So I guess, if there's big tax changes above and beyond kind of indexing the income tax system for inflation, I wouldn't be particularly in favour of a renewal of the €200 electricity credit that went to all households. Now, it's not a lot of money, but you'd prefer to see that focused on the people, I think, who really need it. Because I think, as well, the government needs to keep a bit of money in reserve, because there are fears about things in the winter. We just don't know yet. It may not come to it, but there are fears about things like gas supplies, the impact of that on growth across Europe and in Ireland too. And we just need to keep an eye of having a bit of flexibility and a few spare resources around as well.
Yeah, because we're talking about the cost of energy, the actual access to it, rationing and so on is being mentioned. So that would be something the government would. There's not money you can throw on that. You either have it or you don't. So that's
yeah, well, that's true. But I suppose there might be a need to, if you got in a worst case scenario, there might be a need to support, people who are laid off for short periods of time as industry readjusted to that kind of situation, in the way that happened during COVID. So it's just a lot of uncertainty. We just don't know how that will play out. But we're in a situation where we've seen an extraordinary number of hits over the last few years and things we never would have thought of, and there just may be a few more ahead before we see a bit of calmer water, I suppose.
Yeah,
hopefully.
It seems a long way away. Michelle Murphy is also our third contributor. Michelle, good afternoon to you as well.
Good afternoon, Emmett.
As you've heard Cliff and Philip talking about there, there's that delicate balancing act, and then there's the, people who are really in need. There are some people more in need than others. There's this whole idea of the squeezed middle. We haven't heard about them for a while, but they're still out there. So this group of people that are above social welfare entitlement, but are really feeling the heat as well, no pun intended. So how, from what you're hearing, how well do you think the government is getting the balance right?
Well, I suppose from what we've heard so far, we would echo Cliff's concerns, especially around some of the one-off measures, such as, renewing the energy credit as well. I mean, that was not well targeted, and it's not a good use of €400 million. I mean, you can target that because we know the people who are most impacted by this, they're the bottom 20% of the income distribution. So they're low-paid workers, or they're people on a fixed income, so they're on a social welfare payment. Those are the people who are being impacted the most. So you need to target the resources there. So that means increasing core social welfare rates by €20 a week. You need to look at low-paid workers, things like the living wage, but tax credits in particular make tax credits refundable for low-paid workers, and then make increases via the tax credit system. Proportionally, it means more to them. But then you mentioned there the windfall gain element, and we would be concerned that government would start using some of that windfall income to fund current expenditure measures. And we published our budget briefing just last week, and we were very consistent that any sort of windfall gain from corporate tax or for increased VAT, from the increased inflation costs, that should go to one-off things such as providing social and affordable housing. That's also a driver of the cost of living increases, the cost of housing. Looking at things like investing in our green infrastructure. We need to upgrade the national grid. We need to look at charging infrastructure for electric vehicles, look at our whole transport fleet and how we make that more climate friendly. So that money should be invested in very strategic areas. It shouldn't be used to fund current expenditure measures. So, I mean, that would be our message to government. You need to target it at those who need it most. We know who those households are. We know where they are. There's specific measures that you can use to do that. And then your windfall gains should be strategically invested in areas where we've had persistent issues. So housing.
Okay. Well, let's just see how that resonates or doesn't. Less depending on in the political system. Philip, you've heard two critiques there from Michelle, and Cliff echoed them to some degree as well. The energy rebate is too broad. It's not means tested. Wealthy people who are well able to get through these energy crises don't really need it. They've done it before, now they're going to go twice. And also they're spending corporation tax windfall revenues. Again, probably should be better off put into a rainy day fund. When you say these points to the politicians, what's the riposte? Or does it gain any currency, either of those points, with them at the moment?
I think the reality of the current administration is it's a three-party government, and you have parties representing different types of electorates, and they are going out of their way to try and do that. And you've seen that quite acutely with Fine Gael in recent times, that they're focusing on this, like you referred to them, the squeeze middle or the coping classes, whatever you'd like to call them, and they're very much apologetically going after that vote, and they're saying, like, look, we can look after the most vulnerable in society, people on lower incomes, but then there's also this group who feel that they pay for everything and get nothing, and that is a voter base that Fine Gael is very much focused on. Fianna Fáil to a certain respect as well. So you're going to find in the budget negotiations that's where the key points will be between them is whether they are going to take the political route or the economic route, where Cliff is saying that it could cause problems and actually cause worse inflation, but will the politicians, being politicians, will always want to address the electoral side of things too.